Colorado Territory, 1872. The drought had come early that year, turning the rolling grasslands brittle beneath a sky as vast and empty as a broken promise. Thomas Tucker Sloane wiped the sweat from his brow and surveyed the parched land that stretched from the base of the foothills toward the distant horizon, where the Rockies rose like ancient guardians. At 24 he stood tall in the stirrups of his saddle, lean and hardened from years working cattle, his eyes the color of mountain lakes narrowed against the relentless sun. "Not much left for them to graze on," he murmured to his foreman, a grizzled man named Jeb who'd been riding these ranges since before Tucker was born. "We'll lose half the herd if we don't find water soon," Jeb replied, his voice carrying the gravelly texture of too many years breathing dust and drinking whiskey. Tucker adjusted his hat, the leather worn and shaped perfectly to his head after 3 years of daily wear. His father had bought it for him just before the fever took him, leaving Tucker with 5,000 acres of struggling ranchland, a mortgage to the bank in Denver, and the crushing weight of a legacy he wasn't sure he could preserve. The Sloane Ranch had been carved from wilderness by his father's relentless determination, a determination that had cost him his marriage when Tucker's mother fled back east, unable to bear the isolation and hardship any longer. Tucker had been just 8 when she left, old enough to remember her tears, young enough to believe she might return someday. She never did. "We'll drive them north toward Bear Creek," Tucker decided, squinting at the horizon. There might be water there still. But even as he gave the order, doubt gnawed at him like a coyote at a carcass. The truth that haunted Tucker Sloane was simple and brutal. The frontier broke everything eventually. It broke men, broke marriages, broke promises. The lesson his father had unknowingly taught him was that to survive out here, a man had to be harder than the land itself. Love was a luxury the West couldn't afford, and trust was a shortcut to heartbreak or an early grave. "You heading into Clearwater for supplies tomorrow?" Jeb asked as they turned their horses back toward the ranch house. Tucker nodded. "We need more salt for the cattle, and I need to talk to the bank about extending our loan." The thought of town brought no pleasure. Clearwater was growing, the railroad had come through last year. But to Tucker, each new building, each new face represented another potential threat to what remained of his father's dream. The land developers were circling, eager to carve up ranches into town plots now that the trains were bringing settlers west. That night, Tucker sat alone on the porch of the ranch house, a building that felt too large for just one man. The Cowboys bunked in the bunkhouse 50 yards away, their laughter and occasional burst of harmonica music drifting across the yard. He'd been invited to join them, as always, but preferred the solitude. The stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, pinpricks of light in the vast emptiness. Tucker pulled his father's old pocket watch from his vest and clicked it open, studying the faded photograph nestled inside the cover, his parents on their wedding day, his mother's smile bright with hope that would later turn to despair. "I won't let it slip away," he whispered to the night. "This land is all that matters now." The journey into Clearwater took most of the morning. Tucker rode alone, the rhythmic hoofbeats of his stallion Ranger the only company he desired. The town had grown considerably in the past year, sprouting new buildings along its main street like mushrooms after rain. The railroad depot bustled with activity, drummers with sample cases, women in Eastern fashions stepping carefully down from passenger cars, men in suits eyeing the frontier town with speculative gazes. Tucker tied Ranger outside the general store and adjusted his gun belt, a habit born of necessity rather than bravado. The West was civilizing, but not yet civil. "Morning, mister." Sloane greeted Samuel Wilson, the proprietor, as Tucker entered. "Been expecting you." "Just need the usual supplies, Sam," Tucker replied, handing over his list. "And any news worth knowing?" While Sam gathered the items, Tucker leaned against the counter, surveying the store. A young woman stood examining bolts of fabric, her back to him. Something about the graceful tilt of her head, the careful way she handled the materials, caught his attention despite himself. "That there's Miss Tessa Callahan," Sam said quietly, noticing Tucker's gaze. "Arrived on yesterday's train from Boston. Going to be our new schoolteacher come fall." As if hearing her name, the woman turned, and Tucker found himself looking into eyes the color of amber honey, set in a face that made him momentarily forget the drought, the struggling ranch, and all the reasons he preferred solitude. She was perhaps 21 or 22, with chestnut hair arranged neatly beneath a modest bonnet. Her dress, while simple, spoke of Eastern refinement, pale blue calico that complemented her fair complexion. But it was her expression, curious, intelligent, unafraid, that truly distinguished her from the frontier women he knew. "Good morning," she said, approaching the counter with a bolt of fabric. Her voice carried the refined lilt of education, but without the condescension Tucker had come to expect from Easterners. "Miss Callahan, may I introduce Mr. Thomas Sloane," Sam said. "Owns one of the biggest cattle ranches in the territory." "A pleasure to meet you, Mr. Sloane," she said, extending a gloved hand. Tucker hesitated before taking it, conscious of his calloused palm against the soft leather of her glove. "Ma'am," he managed, suddenly aware of the trail dust on his clothes and the stubble on his jaw. "Mr. Sloane prefers to be called Tucker," Sam added with a wink. "Everyone around these parts does." A smile touched her lips. "Then I shall do the same if you don't mind." Tucker cleared his throat. "I should get going." "Bank closes at noon," he turned to Sam. "Just put everything on my account." "Actually," Tessa Callahan said, "perhaps you could assist me, Mr. Sloane Tucker. I'm in need of directions to the schoolhouse. I've been told it's somewhat outside of town." Tucker shifted uncomfortably. "It's about 2 miles north, not much to see, hasn't been used in a couple years since the last teacher left." "Left?" she asked. "Married a miner and moved to Leadville," Sam supplied. "That's how it usually goes with our school teachers, they don't tend to stay long." A shadow crossed her face, so briefly Tucker thought he might have imagined it. "Well, I intend to fulfill my contract, 2 years at minimum." Tucker couldn't help himself. What brings a Boston lady out to Colorado territory to teach frontier children? Her chin lifted slightly. "The same thing that brings most people west, I imagine, a new beginning." There was something in her tone, a firmness, a finality, that suggested more than she was saying. Tucker recognized it because he'd heard it in his own voice when deflecting questions about his past. "I could show you the schoolhouse," he found himself offering against his better judgment, "if you'd like." Her smile returned, genuine this time. "I would appreciate that very much." An hour later, after a detour to the bank, where the news had been exactly as grim as Tucker expected, he found himself riding alongside the rented wagon that carried Tessa Callahan toward the weathered schoolhouse. She handled the reins with surprising competence for an Easterner. "You've driven before," he observed. "My father believed young women should be capable," she replied. "He taught me to ride and drive before I was 12. "Your father sounds like a practical man." "He was," she said softly. "He passed last winter." Tucker studied her profile, noting the grief etched there like a subtle watermark. "I'm sorry." "Thank you, it's partly why I came west. Too many memories in Boston." They crested a small rise and the schoolhouse came into view, a simple clapboard building with a small bell tower, surrounded by prairie grass and wildflowers. It stood alone against the vastness of the landscape, brave and forlorn at once. Tessa Callahan drew the wagon to a halt, her expression brightening. "It's perfect." Tucker raised an eyebrow. "It needs work. Roof probably leaks, and those steps won't last another winter." "Yes, but look at the light, the space." She climbed down without waiting for his assistance and approached the building with eager steps, and the view. "Imagine learning your letters with the mountains as your backdrop." Tucker dismounted and followed her, reluctantly charmed by her enthusiasm. He watched as she peered through the windows, her face illuminated by dust-filtered sunshine. "Careful with that door," he warned as she reached for the handle. "Might be." The hinges gave way with a protesting screech, and Tessa stumbled backward as the door nearly came off in her hand. Tucker caught her elbow, steadying her before she could fall. "Loose," he finished, aware of her warmth beneath the cotton of her sleeve. She laughed, a sound like clear water over stones. "Well, now I know the first repair needed." Inside, the schoolhouse was a single room with rows of battered desks facing a teacher's desk on a small platform. A blackboard hung on the wall behind it, still bearing the faint chalk marks of lessons long concluded. Tessa walked slowly down the center aisle, trailing her fingers along the desktops. 24 desks, she counted. "Do you know how many children might attend?" Tucker leaned against the doorframe. "Maybe 15 from town, plus some ranch children when they can be spared from chores. Winter, you might get more, summer, fewer." "And your ranch, are there children there?" Tucker shook his head. "Just cowhands." Nearest family with school-age children would be the Hendersons, about 4 miles east. She nodded, absorbing the information with the same careful attention she'd shown the fabric in the store. Will you help me with something, Tucker? Before he could answer, she was opening windows, one after another, letting in fresh air and more light. Could you help me move this desk? I think it would work better centered beneath the window, don't you? Tucker found himself doing as she asked, repositioning furniture according to her vision of what the schoolhouse could become. Her energy was infectious, her determination palpable as she described her plans for lessons, for community gatherings, for making this neglected building the heart of something new. You've got big plans for a place you just set foot in, he observed as they finished rearranging the last of the desks. Tessa brushed a strand of hair from her flushed face. I believe in beginnings, Mr. Sloane. In possibilities. Out here, Miss Callahan, possibilities have a way of drying up faster than creek beds in August. Her amber eyes met his, unwavering. Perhaps, but I've found that even in the driest times, there's water beneath the surface if you know where to look. Tucker looked away first, unsettled by her optimism and the strange flutter it caused in his chest. I should get you back to town. It'll be dark soon, and these roads aren't safe after nightfall. As they rode back toward Clearwater, the setting sun painted the landscape in hues of gold and crimson. Tucker found himself watching Tessa's profile against that blazing backdrop, noting how she seemed to absorb the beauty around her, storing it like provision against future hardship. Will I see you at church on Sunday? She asked as they neared the town. I don't attend much, Tucker admitted. Ranch work doesn't observe the Sabbath. Neither does teaching really, she replied. But I find making time for community matters, especially in places where people are spread thin across the land. Tucker felt a twinge of something like regret. The land takes what it needs, Miss Callahan. Leaves precious little for socializing. She was quiet for a moment. What about for living, Mr. Sloane? Does it leave room for that? The question hung between them as they reached the small boarding house where she was staying. Tucker helped her down from the wagon, careful to maintain a proper distance. Thank you for your assistance today, she said formally, though her eyes held a warmth that belied the stiffness of her words. My pleasure, ma'am, Tucker tipped his hat. Good luck with your schoolhouse. As he rode away, her question echoed in his mind. Living, as if surviving wasn't all that mattered in a place that took everything you loved if you weren't vigilant. As if there could be more than endurance in a land that had broken his father and driven away his mother. Tucker turned Ranger toward home, toward the ranch that consumed his days and haunted his nights. The land was his burden, his purpose, his prison. What would a Boston schoolteacher know of such things? Yet as the miles passed beneath Ranger's hooves, Tucker found himself glancing back toward Clearwater more than once, wondering what Tessa Callahan might see if she looked out her window toward the darkening prairie. 2 weeks passed before Tucker returned to town. The cattle drive to Bear Creek had been arduous, with 3 cows lost to exhaustion and the creek yielding less water than hoped. He'd driven the herd back to the southern pasture, where at least there was some shade from the cottonwoods along the dried riverbed. His business in Clearwater was grim, another meeting with the bank, another request for more time on the loan. The banker, Harrison Green, had been polite but firm. I can give you until October, Tucker, he'd said, not unkindly, but the railroad's bringing investors with ready cash. If you can't make your payment then. Tucker had nodded, understanding the unspoken conclusion. He'd lose the ranch, lose his father's legacy, lose everything. Now, standing outside the bank with failure pressing down on him like a physical weight, he spotted a familiar figure emerging from the general store, arms laden with packages. Tessa Callahan wore a simple green dress today, her chestnut hair braided and coiled at the nape of her neck. She was speaking animatedly to a young boy who carried even more packages, her expression bright with enthusiasm. Tucker should have turned away, headed for his horse, ridden back to the problems waiting at the ranch. Instead, he found himself crossing the street toward her. Miss Callahan, he called. She turned, her smile widening when she saw him. Mr. Sloane, what perfect timing. Billy, this is Mr. Sloane, who owns the big ranch north of town. The boy, perhaps 12, nodded respectfully. Sir. Billy has been helping me carry supplies for the schoolhouse, Tessa explained. We're preparing for opening day next month. Looks like quite an undertaking, Tucker observed, eyeing the packages. Just books, slates, chalk, and some curtain material, she said. Though I confess I'm not certain how I'll transport it all to the schoolhouse. I could take you, Tucker offered, again surprising himself. My wagon's behind the livery. Her eyes brightened. Are you certain? I wouldn't want to impose. I'm headed that direction anyway, he lied. An hour later, they were again on the road to the schoolhouse, the wagon bed filled with Tessa's supplies. Billy had returned to his chores in town, leaving them alone with the rhythmic creak of the wagon wheels and the vast Colorado sky above. How are your cattle faring with the drought? Tessa asked, seeming genuinely interested. Not well, Tucker admitted. We lost 3 on the drive to water. I'm sorry to hear that. She touched his arm briefly, a gesture of sympathy that felt strangely intimate. Is there anything to be done? Tucker sighed. Pray for rain or drill a well, but that takes money I don't have. The drought affects everyone, I suppose, she mused. Mrs. Wilson at the boarding house says the gardens in town are struggling too. Different scale, Tucker said. A failed garden means buying vegetables. A failed ranch means losing everything, she finished softly. He glanced at her, surprised by her perception. I may be new to the West, Mr. Sloane, but I understand what it means to have everything tied up in one future, one dream. Something in her voice suggested personal knowledge of such precariousness. They reached the schoolhouse to find it transformed from their last visit. The steps had been repaired, the door rehung properly, and someone had cleared the overgrown grass from the yard. The town council arranged for repairs, Tessa explained, noting his surprise. And some of the fathers came out on Saturday to help. It seems they're quite invested in having a proper school again. Inside, the changes were even more dramatic. The floors had been scrubbed, the windows washed, and someone had built new bookshelves along one wall. It looks different, Tucker said, helping her carry in the packages. A fresh start, she agreed, though there's still much to be done. As they arranged her supplies, Tucker found himself sharing more about the ranch than he'd intended, the struggles with the mortgage, the pressure from developers, the dwindling herd. My father built that ranch from nothing, he said as they worked. Came out here in '52 with just a wagon and a dream. By the time I was born, he had 5,000 acres and a growing herd. He sounds remarkable, Tessa said, shelving books with careful precision. He was. Hardest working man I ever knew. Tucker paused, running a hand along the edge of a desk. Never stopped even when my mother begged him to move back east. The ranch was everything to him. And to you, she asked quietly. Tucker looked up, meeting her gaze across the room. It's all I have left of him, all I know. Tessa considered this, her head tilted slightly in that way he'd noticed before. Is that why you keep to yourself? Because the ranch demands it. The directness of the question caught him off guard. The frontier isn't kind to connections, Miss Callahan. People leave or die or change, better to count on the land. Even when the land itself is uncertain. When drought can take your cattle and banks can take your property, her tone wasn't challenging, merely curious. At least you know where you stand, Tucker replied. Nature doesn't lie, doesn't make promises it can't keep. Tessa was quiet for a moment, arranging slates on a shelf. My father used to say that the greatest risk in life is to live without risk at all. She smiled sadly. He was a shipbuilder in Boston, built magnificent vessels but never once sailed on them himself. Wise man, Tucker said. Builders stay on shore. That's what my mother said at his funeral, Tessa replied. But I couldn't help thinking how sad it was to create the means of adventure for others while never experiencing it yourself. The conversation shifted to more practical matters then, how many children might attend the school, what supplies were still needed, who in town might help with further repairs. By the time they had unloaded everything and arranged it to Tessa's satisfaction, the afternoon was waning. I should get back, Tucker said reluctantly. Long ride to the ranch. Tessa nodded but seemed hesitant. Would you stay just a moment longer? I'd like to show you something. Curious, Tucker followed her outside and around to the back of the schoolhouse, where a small plot had been cleared and marked with stones. A garden, she explained. For the children to learn about growing things, I thought perhaps, she hesitated, I thought perhaps you might have advice on what grows best here, being a man who knows the land. Tucker was touched by her deference to his knowledge, something few Easterners bothered with. Beans do well, he said, kneeling to examine the soil. Carrots, potatoes, corn needs more water than you might have. Could we dig a small well just for the garden? Might be possible, he said, thinking. Water table's not too deep here, being close to the creek bed. They discussed the possibilities until the setting sun cast long shadows across the garden plot. Tucker found himself genuinely engaged, offering suggestions and even promising to send one of his hands over with some tools for digging. "Thank you, Tucker," Tessa said as they finally returned to the wagon, "for everything." Something in her voice made him look at her more closely. The golden light of sunset illuminated her face, revealing a complexity he hadn't fully appreciated before. There was strength there, yes, but also a vulnerability that resonated with some hidden part of himself. "You're welcome," he said simply, but it felt like more than mere courtesy passing between them. As they rode back toward town, Tucker found himself telling Tessa stories about growing up on the ranch, memories he rarely revisited. The time he'd gotten lost at age 7 and spent a night beneath the stars before his father found him. The first calf he'd helped deliver, the secret swimming hole in the creek where he'd learned to swim. "It sounds like a wonderful childhood," Tessa observed, despite the hardships. Tucker nodded. "It was until my mother left. After that, the ranch became different, less a home, more a responsibility." "And your mother, did she ever return?" "Once when I was 16, stayed for 2 weeks, then left again. Said the frontier would never be civilized enough for her tastes." Tucker shrugged as if it didn't matter anymore. "She remarried in Philadelphia, has 2 more children now." "I'm sorry," Tessa said softly, "don't be. She was right about one thing, this land breaks people who aren't meant for it." Tessa was quiet for a moment, or perhaps it reveals who they truly are. Tucker glanced at her, struck by the observation. "And what has it revealed about you so far, Miss Callahan?" A smile touched her lips. "That I'm stubborn, for one thing. Mrs. Wilson says I'm mad to attempt gardening during a drought." "Stubborn can be good out here," Tucker admitted. "Without it, most would have given up and gone back east long ago." They reached town just as the lamplighter was making his rounds, the warm glow of kerosene lamps creating pools of light along the main street. Tucker helped Tessa down from the wagon, acutely aware of the slenderness of her waist beneath his hands. "Thank you for the ride and the gardening advice," she said, lingering beside the wagon. "Will you be in town for the Founders' Day celebration next week?" Tucker hesitated. He rarely attended town functions, preferring the solitude of the ranch, but something in her expectant gaze made him reconsider. "I might," he said. "If the ranch work allows." Her smile was like sunrise after a long night. "I hope it does." As he drove back toward the ranch through the gathering darkness, Tucker found himself thinking not of the mortgage, nor the drought, nor any of the 100 worries that usually occupied his mind, but of chestnut hair and amber eyes and a garden plot behind a schoolhouse. The week passed in a blur of ranch work. 2 more cattle sickened from drinking stagnant water, and Tucker spent 3 days riding the perimeter of his property, checking for breaks in the fence line where desperate neighboring ranchers might cut through to reach the meager water hole on his land. By Saturday, exhaustion had settled into his bones, but the memory of Tessa's invitation nudged at him persistently. The Founders' Day celebration would begin at noon, with a picnic in the town square followed by dancing in the evening. Tucker hadn't danced since before his father died. "You ought to go," Jeb told him over breakfast. "Boys and I can handle things here for one day." Tucker grunted non-committally, but after the foreman left, he found himself shaving carefully, then digging through his trunk for the good shirt he kept for bank meetings. An hour later, he was riding toward Clearwater, telling himself he was only going to check mail and perhaps buy more ammunition at the general store. The town was transformed. Bunting and flags decorated the buildings along Main Street, and tables had been set up in the square, laden with food. Children ran laughing between the displays, while women in their Sunday best arranged dishes and men gathered in conversational clusters, their usual work clothes replaced by clean shirts and polished boots. Tucker left Ranger at the livery and made his way toward the celebration, suddenly self-conscious. He nodded to acquaintances, exchanged brief greetings with other ranchers, but his eyes scanned the crowd for one particular face. He found her near the schoolhouse display, where children were demonstrating their knowledge of letters and figures to proud parents. Tessa wore a dress of deep blue that complemented her coloring perfectly, her hair arranged more elaborately than he'd seen before, with small white flowers woven into the braids. She was explaining something to an elderly couple, her hands moving animatedly as she spoke. Tucker hung back, suddenly uncertain. She belonged here in this community gathering, radiating warmth and purpose. He was the outsider, the solitary rancher more comfortable with cattle than conversation. Just as he considered slipping away, she looked up and saw him. Her face brightened instantly, and she excused herself from the couple to make her way toward him. You came, she said, genuine pleasure in her voice. I wasn't certain you would. Figured the ranch could spare me for a day, he replied, fighting the urge to adjust his collar. I'm glad. Come, let me introduce you to some of my students and their parents. Before Tucker could protest, she had taken his arm and was guiding him toward the schoolhouse display. For the next hour, he found himself drawn into conversations with townspeople he knew only by sight, with parents eager to discuss their children's education, with merchants curious about his cattle operation. Tessa moved beside him with easy grace, bridging awkward silences, drawing out connections between him and the others. You're good at this, he murmured during a momentary lull, making people talk to each other. She smiled. It's part of teaching, I think, finding the connections people don't realize they have. As the afternoon progressed, Tucker found himself relaxing, even enjoying the celebration. The food was plentiful, the company pleasant, and Tessa's presence beside him somehow made the social interactions less daunting than they normally would have been. Walk with me, she asked after they'd eaten. I'd like to show you something. She led him away from the square toward the small church at the edge of town. Behind it, a cemetery spread beneath ancient cottonwoods, their leaves rustling in the warm breeze. I discovered this my first week here, Tessa said as they walked between the grave markers. It tells the story of this place better than any book could. Tucker followed her to a section where the oldest graves stood, some dating back to the 1850s. Simple wooden crosses and stone markers bore witness to the harshness of frontier life, children taken by fever, women lost in childbirth, men killed by accidents or violence. Mary Ellen Howard, Tessa read from one weathered stone. Beloved wife and mother, 1831-862, her husband is buried beside her, died 20 years later, and look, their daughter lived to be 87. She pointed to a newer grave nearby. What do you see when you look at these? Tucker asked, genuinely curious. Lives lived fully despite hardship, she replied without hesitation, connections that endured even through loss. The story of this place isn't just about what was taken, but what was built, what was loved. Tucker was silent, considering her words as they moved among the graves. Finally, they reached the newer section where his father's stone stood, simple, dignified, bearing only the name, dates, and the words, "He tamed the wilderness." Your father, Tessa asked softly, noting his pause. Tucker nodded, been 3 years now. She stood beside him in respectful silence for a moment, then gently touched the stone. He would be proud of you, continuing his work. Would he? Tucker's voice was rougher than he intended. The ranch is mortgaged to the hilt, the herd's dwindling, and I'm one bad season away from losing everything he built. Tessa turned to face him, her expression earnest. You're fighting for it. That's what matters. Fighting and losing are still losing in the end. She shook her head. My father used to say that how we face inevitable loss reveals more about us than how we celebrate victory. Tucker looked away, uncomfortable with both her insight and his own emotional response to it. We should get back, he said. They'll be starting the dancing soon. As they walked back toward the town square, Tessa's words echoed in Tucker's mind. How we face inevitable loss. Was that all his life had become, a prolonged, doomed battle against the inevitable? And if so, what did that reveal about him? The town square had been transformed again. Tables had been pushed aside to create a dance floor, and the local musicians, a fiddle player, a man with a guitar, and another with a mouth organ, were tuning up on a small platform. Lanterns hung from ropes strung between buildings, creating a warm, inviting glow as the sun began to set. Will you dance, Tucker? Tessa asked as the first notes of a lively reel filled the air. He hesitated. I'm not much of a dancer. Nor am I, she admitted with a laugh. But isn't that the point of gatherings like this, to do things together that we might not attempt alone? Before he could respond, she was being approached by the young son of the general store owner, asking shyly for a dance. Tessa accepted with gracious charm, allowing herself to be led onto the floor. Tucker watched from the sidelines as she moved through the figures of the dance, her blue dress swirling around her ankles, her face alight with enjoyment. Other young men approached her for subsequent dances, and she accepted each with the same gracious warmth, though Tucker noted she never danced with the same partner twice. Quite a lady, that new schoolteacher, commented Harrison Green, the banker, who had appeared beside Tucker with a cup of punch. Tucker nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Shame she won't last, Green continued. Pretty thing like that will be snatched up by some merchant or lawyer before the year's out. That's how it always goes with the schoolmarms. Tucker felt an irrational surge of irritation. She seems committed to teaching. Green chuckled, they all say that, but winter's coming and these frontier winters have a way of changing Eastern minds about the romance of the West. He sipped his punch. Speaking of winter, Tucker, I've been meaning to talk to you about the ranch. I know October's our deadline, but if you wanted to consider selling now, I've got a buyer who. Not interested, Tucker cut him off. Just think about it, Green persisted. The railroad's bringing progress. That land would be worth more subdivided for settlement than it ever will be as grazing land, especially with the drought. Tucker turned to face the banker directly. That land is my father's legacy, it's not for sale. Green sighed, sentiment's a luxury, son. Your father would understand the business reality. Before Tucker could form a retort, Tessa appeared before them, slightly breathless from dancing. Mr. Green, she greeted the banker with polite formality. I trust you're enjoying the celebration. Indeed, Miss Callahan, you've certainly brought a fresh spirit to our little town. Everyone has been most welcoming, she replied, then turned to Tucker. I believe you promised me a dance, Mr. Sloane. Tucker blinked in surprise, having promised no such thing, but recognized the rescue for what it was. So I did, he agreed, offering his arm and leading her away from the banker. Thank you, he murmured as they reached the edge of the dance floor. You looked like a man in need of escape, she replied with a small smile. Though I hope you don't mind that I've committed you to a dance now. The musicians had shifted to a slower waltz, and couples were forming around them. Tucker hesitated, then tentatively placed his hand at Tessa's waist. I haven't done this in years, he admitted. I might step on your toes. I'll risk it, she said, placing her hand in his. They moved awkwardly at first, Tucker trying to remember the steps his mother had taught him long ago. But gradually, the music and Tessa's gentle guidance helped him find the rhythm. He became acutely aware of the warmth of her hand in his, the subtle scent of lavender that clung to her hair, the trust with which she followed his lead despite his rusty skills. What was Mr. Green saying that upset you? She asked quietly as they circled the floor. Tucker sighed. Trying to convince me to sell the ranch, says it's worth more for settlement than cattle now. And you don't want to sell. It's not just land, Tucker said, surprised by his own openness. It's everything my father worked for, everything I know if I lose it. He trailed off, unable to articulate the void that would be left. Tessa's eyes held his, understanding beyond her years in their amber depths. It's your home. Yes, he said simply, relieved that she understood what he couldn't fully explain. Then I hope you find a way to keep it, she said with quiet conviction. They danced in silence after that, moving more smoothly as Tucker's confidence returned. When the music ended, he was almost disappointed, reluctant to release her hand. Thank you for the dance, Tessa said, her cheeks flushed becomingly. Thank you for the rescue, Tucker replied with a small smile. The evening continued with more dancing, more conversation, more connections forming between Tucker and the community he'd held at arm's length for so long. And at the center of it all was Tessa, drawing him out, introducing him to parents of future students, helping him see Clearwater not just as a town near his ranch, but as a community of which he was a part. As the celebration finally wound down near midnight, Tucker offered to walk Tessa back to her boarding house. It was a good day, she said as they strolled beneath the star-filled sky. I think the school year is off to an auspicious beginning. You've certainly won over the town, Tucker observed. Every parent I spoke to is eager for their children to learn from you. She smiled, pleased. I only hope I can live up to their expectations. They reached the boarding house, its windows dark except for a single lamp left burning in the parlor. Tucker suddenly found himself reluctant to say goodnight to end this unexpected day of connection. Will you be at church tomorrow? Tessa asked, pausing at the bottom of the porch steps. Tucker hesitated. Would you like me to be? The directness of her gaze was answer enough. Yes, she said simply. Then I'll be there. A smile bloomed on her face, genuine and warm. Good night, Tucker. Good night, Tessa. As he walked back toward the livery to retrieve Ranger, Tucker realized it was the first time he'd used her given name. It felt right on his tongue, natural, as if he'd been meant to say it all along. The ride back to the ranch was long and dark, but Tucker barely noticed. His mind was filled with blue dresses and amber eyes, with the feel of a slender waist beneath his hand, with the surprising joy of being part of something larger than his solitary struggle. For the first time in years, he fell asleep without the weight of the ranch pressing down on his dreams. True to his word, Tucker attended church the following morning. He sat in the back, uncomfortable in his suit, but Tessa's smile when she saw him made the discomfort worthwhile. After the service, several ranching families invited him to Sunday dinner, invitations he would normally have declined but now found himself considering. "You should go to the Hendersons," Tessa advised when he sought her counsel. "They have 3 children who will be attending school, and Sarah Henderson makes the best apple pie in the territory." Tucker raised an eyebrow. "You've been here less than a month. How do you know who makes the best pie?" Tessa laughed. "I've been systematically sampling baked goods at every opportunity. It's essential research for a school teacher." Her laughter was infectious, and Tucker found himself smiling more genuinely than he had in years. "The Hendersons it is, then." That Sunday dinner was the first of many social engagements Tucker found himself accepting over the following weeks. The drought continued, and the ranch work was as demanding as ever, but he began making time for weekly trips to town, ostensibly to check mail or purchase supplies, but increasingly to seek out Tessa's company. Sometimes he found her at the schoolhouse, preparing lessons or working in the fledgling garden behind the building. Other times, she was in town, teaching reading to adults in the evening or helping organize the lending library that operated out of the back of the general store. Wherever she was, her face brightened when she saw him, and Tucker found himself living for those moments of recognition, of welcome. September brought the official opening of the school term. Tucker rode to town to watch as 22 children filed into the schoolhouse for their first day of lessons. Tessa stood at the door in a crisp white shirtwaist and dark skirt, greeting each child by name, her face alight with purpose. "Quite a turnout," Tucker commented when the last child had entered. "More than expected," she agreed happily. "Even the Miller twins from out past your place." Tucker nodded. Their father mentioned they'd be attending. Said he'd be bringing them in the wagon 3 days a week when he comes for supplies. "Will you come in, see what we've accomplished?" He followed her into the schoolhouse, now transformed into a true place of learning. Books lined the shelves, maps hung on the walls, and the children sat at desks arranged in neat rows, their faces a mixture of excitement and trepidation. "Class, this is Mr. Sloane," Tessa introduced him. "He owns the big cattle ranch north of town, and he helped me prepare our schoolhouse this summer." 22 pairs of eyes regarded him with curiosity. Tucker shifted, uncomfortable with the attention but managed a nod. "Study hard," he advised awkwardly. "Knowledge is valuable out here." It wasn't much of a speech, but the children seemed impressed nonetheless by the tall rancher in their midst. As Tucker prepared to leave, Tessa walked him to the door. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. "It means a great deal to have your support." Tucker looked down at her earnest face and felt something shift inside him, like earth moving after a long freeze. "You're doing important work," he said. "These children are lucky to have you." Her smile was radiant. "Will you come to dinner at my boarding house this Friday? Mrs. Wilson has invited several of the parents and town council members to celebrate the school opening." "I'd be honored," Tucker replied, meaning it. As he rode back to the ranch, he reflected on how much had changed in the short months since Tessa's arrival. The drought continued, the bank loan still loomed, but somehow the weight of these burdens had shifted, become more bearable. He found himself looking forward, making plans beyond the next day's work or the next crisis. The dinner at Mrs. Wilson's boarding house was a convivial affair. 8 guests gathered around the large dining table, sharing news and stories as platters of roasted chicken, potatoes, and late summer vegetables were passed. Tessa, seated across from Tucker, was the natural center of attention, with parents eager to hear about their children's progress and town council members proud of their decision to hire such a capable teacher. "Miss Callahan tells us you've been helping with the school garden, Mr. Sloane," Mrs. Wilson commented as she served apple pie for dessert. Tucker nodded. "Just some advice on what might grow best. Miss Callahan did all the real work." "Nonsense," Tessa countered. "Mr. Sloane sent 2 of his ranch hands to dig the well that's keeping our garden alive despite the drought, and he provided the seeds for our fall plantings." Tucker felt himself flush under her praise. "It's a good project for the children, teaching them self-sufficiency." "Precisely," Tessa agreed, "which is why I've proposed that we expand the garden next spring, perhaps even add a few chickens. The children could learn animal husbandry as well as agriculture." The conversation flowed around plans for the school, for the town's growth, for the future. Tucker contributed where he could, but mostly he watched Tessa, the animation in her face as she described her vision for education, the careful attention she paid to each person's input, the quiet confidence she displayed when discussing her plans. After dinner, while the other guests moved to the parlor for coffee, Tucker found himself alone with Tessa in the small back garden of the boarding house. Night had fallen, and the stars gleamed overhead, impossibly bright and clear in the high desert air. "You seem to thrive here," Tucker observed as they stood side by side, looking up at the constellations. "Despite all your warnings about how the frontier breaks people." Tessa smiled. "Perhaps I'm more suited to it than I anticipated. Or perhaps Clearwater is gentler than the frontier of legend." "It's changing," Tucker admitted, "growing, becoming something different from what my father knew." "Change isn't always loss," Tessa said quietly. "Sometimes it's expansion. Like a garden taking root in new soil." Tucker turned to look at her, this woman who had somehow planted herself in the hardscrabble soil of his existence and bloomed against all odds. "You've changed things," he said. "The town." "The children, me." Her eyes met his, steady and warm in the starlight. "You've changed me too, Tucker. Shown me the depth of what it means to belong to a place, to fight for it, to love it despite its harshness." The word love hung between them, resonant with possibilities neither had yet dared to name. Tucker felt the familiar urge to retreat, to protect himself from hope that could so easily be crushed. But something stronger held him there, facing her beneath the vast Colorado sky. "Tessa," he began, uncertain what he meant to say but needing to speak nonetheless. She waited, patient and present, allowing him to find his words. "I've spent 3 years since my father died believing that the ranch was all that mattered, preserving his legacy, continuing his work. But lately I've been wondering if I misunderstood what legacy really means." "How so?" she asked softly. Tucker struggled to articulate the thoughts that had been forming in him since that day at the cemetery. "The ranch isn't just land and cattle, it's a future, a possibility, something to build on, not just preserve." Tessa's smile was gentle, encouraging. "That sounds like a legacy worth fighting for." "It does," he agreed. "But I'm not sure I can save it alone." The admission cost him something, pride, perhaps, or the illusion of self-sufficiency that had sustained him through the lonely years. But the relief of speaking it aloud was greater than the cost. Tessa stepped closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her amber eyes. "You don't have to," she said simply. Before Tucker could respond, Mrs. Wilson called from the back door, reminding them that coffee was being served in the parlor. The moment broke, but something had been acknowledged between them, something neither was quite ready to name but both now recognized. Tucker stayed later than he'd intended, reluctant to end the evening and return to the solitary ranch house. When he finally took his leave, Tessa walked him to the door. "Will you come to the Harvest Festival next month?" she asked. "The school children are preparing recitations." "I wouldn't miss it," Tucker promised. She smiled, pleased. "Good night, then." On impulse, Tucker took her hand and pressed it briefly to his lips, a gesture more formal than intimate, yet charged with unspoken feeling. "Good night, Tessa." The ride home beneath the starlit sky felt different somehow, not a retreat to isolation but a journey between 2 points of belonging. For the first time since his father's death, Tucker allowed himself to imagine a future beyond mere survival, beyond preserving what was already built. He imagined expansion, growth, new life taking root alongside the old. The thought should have frightened him, should have triggered the old warnings about attachment and loss. Instead, it filled him with a quiet determination, a certainty that whatever came next, drought or rain, success or failure, it would be faced not alone but in partnership. Not just endured but lived. October arrived with cooler temperatures but no relief from the drought. The deadline for Tucker's bank loan payment loomed like a storm on the horizon, and despite his best efforts, he was still short the necessary funds. The cattle were thinner than they should have been for fall, the pastures overgrazed and dusty. Tucker rode fence lines, repaired broken boards, worked from dawn until dusk alongside his ranch hands, trying to stave off the inevitable. Yet even as he labored, he made time each week to ride into Clearwater, drawn by the promise of Tessa's company and the respite she offered from his growing worries. One crisp afternoon, he found her at the schoolhouse after classes had ended, supervising a group of older boys who were constructing a small chicken coop behind the garden. Mr. Sloane, called 12-year-old Billy, the same boy who had helped Tessa carry packages that first day. Come see what we're building. Tucker dismounted and approached the industrious group, impressed by their progress. Fine work, he commented, examining the sturdy frame. These boards joined properly will keep out foxes and coyotes. The boys beamed under his approval, eager to show him their plans for the nesting boxes and feeding area. Tucker found himself offering suggestions, demonstrating proper techniques for hammering nails and measuring corners. Before long, he was working alongside them, the familiar rhythm of construction momentarily displacing his financial worries. Tessa watched from the garden, where she was harvesting the last of the summer vegetables with several of the girls. Her face held a mixture of pride and something softer, more personal, when Tucker caught her eye. As the sun began to set, the children departed for home, leaving Tucker and Tessa alone at the schoolhouse. They worked together to store the tools and tidy the construction area, moving in easy synchronicity that required few words. "You're good with them," Tessa observed as they finished. "The boys look up to you." Tucker shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "They're good workers, quick to learn. They need that men who'll teach them practical skills, show them how to build and repair." She brushed dust from her skirt. "Many of them don't have fathers at home." The simple observation struck Tucker deeply. These children were the future of the frontier, not just students absorbing letters and figures, but the next generation who would build upon what his father's generation had started. What legacy would they inherit if all the ranches were subdivided, all the open range parceled into town plots? "What happens to the school if the railroad brings more settlers?" he asked suddenly. "If Clearwater grows the way Green and his investors expect?" Tessa considered the question seriously. "We'd need a larger building eventually, more teachers, but the fundamentals wouldn't change. Children need education whether they live on ranches or in town homes." "But they'd lose something," Tucker insisted. "The connection to the land, to where food comes from, to the cycles of nature." "Perhaps," Tessa agreed, "unless those of us who value that connection ensure it's preserved." She gestured to the garden and chicken coop. "That's part of why these projects matter so much. They root book learning in practical reality." Tucker nodded, struck by her foresight. "You see further ahead than most." "I try to," she said simply. "Teaching requires hope in the future, even when the present is challenging." The words resonated with Tucker's own situation. "Speaking of challenges," he said reluctantly, "I should get back to the ranch. Still have accounts to review before tomorrow." Tessa's expression grew concerned. "The bank payment." Tucker nodded, not bothering to hide his worry from her. Over the weeks since the Founders' Day celebration, he had shared more and more of his struggles with the ranch, finding in Tessa an attentive listener and thoughtful advisor. "Is there anything I can do?" she asked. The offer touched him deeply, though they both knew there was little a schoolteacher could do to address a mortgage payment. "Just knowing you're here helps," he admitted. "Gives me something to look forward to beyond the daily grind." Her smile was worth the vulnerability of the confession. "Then I'm glad to provide that at least." As they walked to where Ranger was tethered, Tucker found himself reluctant to leave, despite the pressing work awaiting him. "The Harvest Festival is next week," he said. "Would you allow me to escort you?" The formality of the request made Tessa's eyes crinkle with amusement. "I would be honored, Mr. Sloane." "Good," Tucker said, suddenly shy. "That's good." Their farewell was brief but charged with unspoken feeling. As Tucker rode back toward the ranch, he found himself torn between the growing joy of his connection with Tessa and the looming specter of financial ruin. How could he offer her anything when his entire future hung in the balance? The answer came from an unexpected quarter the following day. Tucker was reviewing his accounts in the ranch house, trying to find assets he might sell to meet the bank payment, when Jeb knocked on the door. "Riders coming," the foreman announced. "Looks like Harrison Green and some city fellow." Tucker's heart sank. The banker rarely brought good news these days, and an accompanying stranger suggested further pressure to sell. He met them in the yard, noting Green's nervous expression and the expensive eastern suit of his companion, who sat uncomfortably atop a rented horse. "Tucker," Green began after dismounting, "this is Mr. Jameson from the railroad company. He's interested in discussing a proposition with you." The stranger extended his hand. "Philip Jameson, Land Acquisition for the Central Pacific. Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Sloane." Tucker shook the man's hand warily. "If you're here to discuss buying my ranch, I'm afraid you've wasted a trip." Jameson smiled thinly. Not exactly buying, Mr. Sloane. The railroad is considering a spur line to connect Clearwater more directly with our main route. Such a line would need to cross a portion of your land. Tucker stiffened. My father's agreement with the railroad was clear. The main line would stay south of our property. And it has, Green interjected. But the town's growth has exceeded expectations. The spur line would bring significant commerce to Clearwater, benefiting everyone. Including the bank's investors in town properties, Tucker observed dryly. Green had the grace to look embarrassed. The economic benefits would be widespread. Jameson cleared his throat. We're prepared to offer substantial compensation for the right-of-way, Mr. Sloane, enough to resolve your current financial difficulties. He glanced meaningfully at Green, confirming Tucker's suspicion that the banker had shared details of his mortgage situation. How much land are we talking about? Tucker asked, despite his instinctive resistance. A strip approximately 50 feet wide running east to west across your southern section, Jameson replied. Perhaps 3 miles total through your property. Tucker calculated quickly. The southern section was primarily grazing land, not the best pasture but usable. A railroad cutting through it would disrupt cattle movement, create noise and sparks that could cause fires, and forever alter the character of the ranch. I'd need to think about it, he said finally, and see the exact proposed route on a map. Jameson nodded unsurprised. Of course, I've brought preliminary drawings. He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a rolled parchment. Perhaps we could discuss inside. For the next hour, the three men pored over maps and figures at Tucker's kitchen table. The compensation offered was indeed substantial, enough to pay off the mortgage entirely and leave funds for improvements to the ranch. The proposed route would disrupt some grazing patterns but avoided the creek and the best pasture land. Jameson also mentioned potential benefits: easier shipping of cattle, improved access to markets, increased land values. You'd be securing your father's legacy for generations, Green added, while still maintaining the ranch as a working operation. The words struck Tucker forcefully. Wasn't that exactly what he'd been struggling to achieve? Yet something held him back from immediate agreement. I need time to consider, he said finally. This isn't a decision I can make on the spot. Jameson nodded. Understandable. The railroad can wait 1 week for your answer. After that, we would need to explore alternative routes. After the men departed, Tucker sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the maps they'd left behind. The offer represented both solution and compromise, financial security at the cost of permanent alteration to his father's ranch. Would James Sloane have accepted such a bargain? Or would he have continued fighting against the encroachment of progress, holding to his original vision regardless of cost? Tucker needed counsel, but not from Green or Jameson with their vested interests. He needed someone who understood both the value of preservation and the necessity of adaptation. Someone who could see beyond immediate pressures to longer horizons. He needed Tessa. The following day, Tucker rode into Clearwater earlier than usual, arriving just as school was dismissing. He waited outside while the children filed out, many calling cheerful greetings as they passed. When the last student had departed, he entered to find Tessa erasing the blackboard, her back to the door. Tucker, she said without turning, recognizing his footsteps. This is a pleasant surprise. How did you know it was me? He asked, pausing in the doorway. She glanced over her shoulder with a small smile. Your boots have a distinctive sound on these floors. Very purposeful. The observation, so personal and accurate, momentarily distracted Tucker from his purpose. He watched as she finished cleaning the blackboard, noting the graceful efficiency of her movements, the way tendrils of her chestnut hair had escaped their pins during the day's teaching. Is everything all right? She asked, turning to face him fully. You look troubled. Tucker crossed to the teacher's desk and set down the rolled maps he'd brought. I need your advice, he said simply. Tessa's expression grew serious. Of course. What's happened? As Tucker explained the railroad's proposal, unrolling maps across the desktop, Tessa listened with complete attention. She asked clarifying questions about the route, the compensation, the potential impact on ranch operations. When he finished, she studied the maps in silence for several moments. It would change things permanently, she observed. Once a railroad comes through, there's no returning to what was before. Tucker nodded. That's what's holding me back. My father built this ranch as a place apart from all that. Accepting the railroad feels like giving up something essential. Yet refusing means potentially losing everything, Tessa said, not as a counterargument but as a recognition of his dilemma. What would your father have wanted most, for the land to remain exactly as he left it, or for his son to continue ranching it, even with compromises? The question pierced to the heart of Tucker's struggle. I don't know, he admitted. He was stubborn about the land but practical about ranching. He understood that adaptation was sometimes necessary for survival. Tessa traced the proposed railroad route with her finger. This doesn't destroy the ranch, she said thoughtfully. It alters its boundaries, its operations perhaps, but the heart of it remains intact. The heart of it, Tucker repeated, considering. The homestead, the best pastures, the creek where I learned to swim. The legacy isn't in the exact acreage, Tessa suggested. It's in the continuing life of the place, in the values it represents, hard work, connection to the land, building something that endures. Her words resonated with Tucker's own evolving thoughts about his father's legacy. Perhaps preserving the ranch didn't mean freezing it in time, but rather ensuring its survival into a changing future. Adaptation rather than rigid preservation. What would you do? He asked finally, trusting her judgment in a way he'd never expected to trust anyone after his father died. Tessa considered carefully before answering. I would view it as neither surrender nor defeat but as strategic compromise, accept what must change to preserve what matters most. Her wisdom, delivered without pretense or self-importance, clarified Tucker's thinking. The railroad was coming, whether through his land or around it. Better to shape its impact than be shaped by it, to use its necessity to secure his father's broader legacy. Thank you, he said simply. Your perspective helps more than you know. Tessa smiled, pleased to have been of assistance. I'm glad. Now will you help me with something in return? Anything, Tucker replied without hesitation. She led him to a large map of Colorado territory hanging on the classroom wall. I'm teaching the children about local geography next week, how settlements develop, why towns grow where they do. Would you show me exactly where your ranch lies in relation to Clearwater, and perhaps explain how your father chose that particular location? For the next hour, Tucker found himself doing what once would have been unthinkable, sharing the story of his family's land not as a private burden, but as part of the region's history. He showed Tessa where his father had first staked his claim, how he had gradually expanded the ranch, why certain parcels were more valuable than others due to water access or grazing quality. The children would benefit so much from hearing this directly from you, Tessa said when he finished. Would you consider speaking to the class sometime, helping them understand the ranch history is part of their own history? The suggestion startled Tucker. I'm not much of a public speaker. You just spoke eloquently for an hour, Tessa pointed out, and children are the most forgiving audience imaginable. Put that way, the idea seemed less daunting. I suppose I could, Tucker conceded. If you think it would help their education. I do, Tessa said firmly. Understanding where we come from helps us determine where we're going. As they left the schoolhouse together, the setting sun painting the western sky in shades of gold and crimson, Tucker felt a curious lightening of spirit despite the weighty decision before him. Sharing the ranch's story with Tessa had clarified its value in his own mind, not just as his personal burden, but as part of a larger tapestry, a thread in the community's development. Would you care to join me for dinner at the hotel? He asked impulsively, to thank you for your counsel. Tessa's smile was answer enough. I would enjoy that very much. The hotel dining room was Clearwater's finest establishment, with white tablecloths and a small orchestra that played on weekend evenings. Tucker rarely dined there, preferring simpler fare at the town's cafe, but tonight felt like an occasion warranting something special. As they were seated at a corner table, Tucker was acutely aware of the glances from other diners, curious, speculative, approving. The young rancher and the schoolteacher, together for what was clearly more than a casual meal. The implications didn't bother him as they once might have. Instead, he felt a quiet pride in being seen with Tessa, in having chosen to step out of isolation into this more public connection. Their conversation over dinner ranged widely, from the harvest festival preparations to books Tessa was introducing to her students, from Tucker's plans for winter grazing to the possibility of expanding the school garden in spring. They discovered shared tastes in music, complementary views on education, and a mutual appreciation for the writings of Emerson. I never finished my formal schooling, Tucker admitted. My father needed me on the ranch after my mother left, but I've always tried to keep reading when I can. The best education often happens outside classroom walls, Tessa said. Experience paired with reflection creates the deepest understanding. By the time they finished their meal, the dining room had nearly emptied, and the small orchestra was packing away their instruments. Tucker realized with surprise that 3 hours had passed in what felt like moments. "I've kept you too late," he said as he helped Tessa with her shawl. "Mrs. Wilson will be worried." "She knows I'm with you," Tessa replied simply. "She trusts your character." The statement, delivered without artifice, touched Tucker deeply. Trust was no small thing on the frontier, where character determined survival as surely as skill or strength. They walked slowly back to the boarding house, reluctant for the evening to end. The night air was cool, carrying the first hint of autumn crispness, and stars crowded the sky overhead. "Have you decided about the railroad offer?" Tessa asked as they neared her door. Tucker nodded. "I think so. Talking it through with you helped clarify my thinking." "I'm glad," she said. "Whatever you decide, I know it will be the right choice for preserving what matters most." They paused at the bottom of the porch steps, that same spot where they had said goodnight after the Founders' Day celebration. But something had shifted between them since then, deepened into a connection neither could easily dismiss. "Tessa," Tucker began, gathering his courage, "these past months, knowing you, talking with you, it's changed how I see things. How I see myself and the ranch, and what legacy really means." She waited, her amber eyes steady on his face, giving him space to find the words. "I've been thinking of the ranch as something static, something to protect from change at all costs. But that's not what my father built, not really. He created something living, something that could grow and adapt without losing its essence." Tucker took a deep breath. "You helped me see that." "I think you already knew," Tessa said softly. "You just needed someone to reflect it back to you." "Maybe," Tucker conceded. "But it was you who did the reflecting. You, with your gardens and your students and your ability to see possibilities where I saw only threats." He took her hands in his, a gesture more intimate than any they had shared before. "I don't know what the future holds for the ranch, even with the railroad money. The drought might continue, or cattle prices might fall further, but I do know that facing those challenges would be less daunting with you beside me." Tessa's breath caught. "Tucker, are you—" "I'm not proposing," he clarified quickly. "Not yet, that would be presumptuous given how recently we've known each other, but I am asking if you might consider a courtship. A proper one, with the understanding that it could lead to more, if that's what we both come to want." The words felt awkward on his tongue, formal and old-fashioned, but Tessa's luminous smile told him she understood their sincerity. "I would consider that," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "In fact, I've been hoping you might ask." Relief and joy surged through Tucker in equal measure. "You have." Tessa nodded, her smile widening. "Despite your best efforts to remain the solitary rancher, Tucker Sloane, you've revealed yourself to be a man worth knowing, worth caring for." The simple declaration, spoken without coyness or pretense, moved Tucker deeply. In a society where courtship was often governed by elaborate social rituals and veiled intentions, Tessa's straightforward acknowledgement of feeling was as refreshing as mountain air. "May I call on you properly then?" he asked. "Sunday afternoons, perhaps, and escort you to town functions." "Yes," Tessa replied, "and perhaps you might join us for school picnics and Christmas pageants as well. The children would be delighted to have you participate more regularly." The inclusion of her students in her vision of their courtship spoke volumes about Tessa's character. Her work was not separate from her personal life but integral to it, just as the ranch was to Tucker's. "I would be honored," he said. They stood for a moment longer, hands joined, possibilities expanding between them like the vast Colorado sky. Then with gentle deliberation, Tucker bent and placed a kiss on Tessa's cheek, chaste enough for propriety, lingering enough to convey the depth of his feeling. "Good night, Tessa," he murmured. "Good night, Tucker," she replied, her voice warm with promise. "Until Sunday." As Tucker rode back to the ranch that night, his decision about the railroad solidified into certainty. He would accept their offer, using the financial security it provided not just to preserve his father's legacy but to expand upon it. Perhaps adding the adjacent Peterson property that had been for sale for months, improving the ranch house, breeding better cattle for the changing market. And he would do it not in isolation but in partnership, with the community, with the future, and God willing, with Tessa Callahan beside him. The harvest festival arrived on a clear October day, the drought finally broken by a week of gentle rains that had greened the pastures and raised spirits throughout the region. Tucker had accepted the railroad's offer, using part of the advance payment to settle his bank loan and invest in new breeding stock that would arrive in spring. The news had spread quickly through Clearwater, with most townsfolk expressing support for his decision and relief that the Sloane Ranch would continue as a working cattle operation rather than being sold for development. His courtship with Tessa had progressed with the same steady deliberation that characterized both their personalities. Sunday visits had become a cherished routine, sometimes spent at the boarding house parlor, other times walking along the creek near town, or riding out to visit neighboring ranches where Tessa's students lived. Tucker had even begun joining Tessa at church services regularly, finding unexpected comfort in the rituals and community he had long avoided. For the festival, Tucker arrived early to help with preparations, joining other men from town in setting up tables and a small stage in the town square. Tessa was supervising the school children, who would perform recitations and songs as part of the celebration. She wore a dress of deep burgundy that complemented her chestnut hair, which was arranged more elaborately than usual for the special occasion. "You look beautiful," Tucker told her when they finally had a moment alone amid the preparations. Tessa blushed, pleased. "Thank you, you look quite handsome yourself." Tucker glanced down at his best suit, recently pressed by Mrs. Henderson, who had taken pity on his bachelor household. "Trying to do justice to my escort," he said with a smile. Their easy banter was interrupted by the arrival of more wagons bearing families from outlying farms and ranches. The celebration grew as people set out food on the long tables, musicians tuned their instruments, and children ran excitedly through the crowd, anticipating the games and treats that would come later. Tucker found himself genuinely enjoying the festivities, greeting neighbors, discussing the recent rains and their effect on winter pasture, admiring the bounty of produce and preserves displayed for judging. When Tessa's students performed their recitations, he stood proudly near the front, applauding each child with genuine appreciation for their efforts. Afterward, as music filled the square and people began dancing, Tucker sought out Tessa, who was accepting congratulations on her students' performance. "Your teaching shows in how confidently they spoke," he told her when they had a moment alone. "Even shy little Emma Henderson didn't stumble once." Tessa's eyes shone with pride. "They worked so hard. I couldn't be more pleased with them." "Dance with me," Tucker asked, offering his hand as the musicians began a waltz. They moved together with the easy coordination that had developed between them over the months, their bodies finding natural harmony in the dance. Tucker was no longer self-conscious about his skills, focused instead on the joy of holding Tessa close, of moving together among friends and neighbors who nodded approvingly as they passed. "I spoke with the railroad surveyor yesterday," Tucker said as they circled the makeshift dance floor. "Construction won't begin until spring, which gives us plenty of time to move the cattle away from that section beforehand." Tessa nodded. "That's fortunate, and have you decided about the Peterson property?" "I'm meeting with Henry Peterson next week," Tucker replied. "With the additional water rights from his land, we could expand the herd significantly once the drought fully breaks." "It's good to hear you planning for growth," Tessa observed. "When we first met, you spoke only of preservation." Tucker smiled, acknowledging the truth in her observation. "I've had a wise counselor helping me see beyond mere survival to possibility." The dance ended and they moved to the edge of the square, where lanterns were being lit as evening approached. The celebration would continue well into the night, with more music, storytelling, and community meals shared under the stars. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you," Tucker said as they found a quiet moment beside the schoolhouse display. "What brought you to Colorado territory, really? You've mentioned your father's passing, but I sense there was more." Tessa was quiet for a moment, her expression growing more serious. "There was," she admitted. "In Boston, after my father died, I found myself pressured into a betrothal I did not want." Tucker felt a flicker of surprise, though he had suspected something of the sort might have driven her westward. "A betrothal." She nodded. "To the son of my father's business partner. It was expected to merge the two shipbuilding companies to preserve my father's legacy through this alliance." Her voice held a note of irony on the word legacy that Tucker understood all too well. "But you didn't love him," Tucker said, not a question but a statement. "No," Tessa confirmed, "and more importantly, I didn't respect him. He viewed the business merely as a source of wealth, not as my father had as a craft and art, a responsibility to those who would sail in the vessels we created. She sighed. When I refused the match, society turned rather cold. The teaching position here represented not just escape but purpose. Tucker considered her revelation, understanding now the shadow he had sometimes glimpsed behind her optimism, the determination that drove her educational vision. You were preserving a different kind of legacy, he observed, your father's values rather than his business. Tessa looked at him with gratitude for his understanding. Yes, exactly. He taught me that true legacy isn't in possessions or titles, but in how we shape the future through our actions, our choices. The parallel to Tucker's own journey was striking, both of them finding their way from rigid preservation to more expansive visions of inheritance and continuity. Both learning that honoring the past sometimes meant choosing new paths forward. Thank you for telling me, Tucker said quietly. Tessa met his gaze directly, her amber eyes reflecting the lantern light. There are no secrets between us now, she said, at least none that matter. The simple statement carried profound meaning, a declaration of trust, of transparency, of mutual understanding that formed the foundation for whatever might come next between them. Before Tucker could respond, they were interrupted by Sarah Henderson, who needed Tessa's help organizing the children for the closing song of the evening. Tucker watched as she moved away, graceful and purposeful, belonging so completely to this community that it was hard to imagine Clearwater without her. Later, as the festival drew to a close and families began departing for their homes, Tucker and Tessa walked together toward the boarding house. The night was clear and cool, stars brilliant overhead, the air fresh with the scent of rain-washed earth. I have something for you, Tucker said as they neared Mrs. Wilson's front gate. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. Tessa accepted it with a curious smile. What's this? Open it, Tucker encouraged. She unwrapped the paper carefully to reveal a small leather-bound journal, its cover embossed with a simple design of wildflowers. It's beautiful, Tessa said, running her fingers over the supple leather. Open the cover, Tucker suggested. Inside, he had written an inscription. For Tessa, who taught me that legacy is not what we preserve but what we plant, with deepest affection. Tucker. Tessa traced the words with her fingertip, her eyes bright with emotion. Thank you, she said softly. I shall treasure this. I thought you might use it to record your observations of the school garden, Tucker explained, for future teachers and students. A growing legacy. The thoughtfulness of the gift clearly moved Tessa deeply. She looked up at Tucker, her expression open and unguarded. You understand me very well, she said. I'm learning too, he replied honestly. And hope to continue learning for a very long time. The implication hung in the air between them, neither pushing toward declarations that would come in their own time, both recognizing the path they were on and its likely destination. Sunday, Tessa asked, their established pattern a comfort and a promise. Sunday, Tucker confirmed, though I may need to check on the north pasture first with the new calves. Bring me with you, Tessa suggested, surprising him. I'd like to see more of the ranch to understand it better. The request touched Tucker deeply, her desire to know his land, to connect with what mattered to him. I'd like that, he said simply. Their goodnight was gentle, a kiss that lingered just long enough to convey deepening affection without pushing beyond the boundaries of their courtship. As Tucker rode home beneath the star-filled sky, he felt a contentment that went beyond the recent resolution of his financial worries, beyond even the pleasure of Tessa's company. It was the feeling of a man who had found his place in the world, not in isolation as he had once believed, but in connection. To the land, yes, but also to the community it supported and the future it promised. Most of all, to the remarkable woman who had helped him see that legacy was not a burden to be carried alone, but a gift to be shared. Winter came early that year, with the first snowfall blanketing the high country before Thanksgiving. The railroad surveyors had completed their work, marking the route that would cut across the southern section of Tucker's ranch, and construction crews were scheduled to begin work as soon as the spring thaw allowed. Tucker had used the time to prepare, moving cattle to northern pastures, strengthening fence lines that would need to contain livestock near the construction, planning for the changes that would come. His courtship with Tessa had deepened with the changing seasons. Their Sunday outings had expanded to include dinner at the ranch house twice a month, where Tessa got to know Jeb and the other hands, understanding better the operation that consumed so much of Tucker's time and energy. She had taken to bringing books for the bunkhouse library and occasionally teaching reading to the younger cowhands who had missed formal education. In turn, Tucker had become more involved with the school, speaking to the children about ranching, helping expand the garden, even attending the Christmas pageant where he found himself unexpectedly moved by the simple performances of the students he had come to know individually through Tessa's stories and his own increasing participation in community life. By February, with winter holding the high country in its grip and long evenings spent before the fire in the ranch house, Tucker knew his heart with certainty. The question was no longer whether he would ask Tessa to share his life, but when and how to do so in a manner worthy of the remarkable woman she was. The opportunity presented itself unexpectedly on a clear, cold Saturday, when Tessa had agreed to accompany Tucker on a sleigh ride to the northern boundary of the ranch. He had business checking on a line cabin where two hands were wintering with part of the herd, and Tessa had eagerly accepted his invitation to join him, bundled in furs against the February chill. The sleigh glided smoothly over packed snow, the horses' breath visible in the crisp air as they trotted along familiar paths now transformed by winter's blanket. Tucker pointed out landmarks as they traveled, the ridge where his father had built the first line cabin, the valley where the best spring grazing could be found, the distant mountains that marked the edge of his property. "It's beautiful," Tessa said, her cheeks flushed with cold and excitement. "So different from how I imagined the West when I was a girl reading dime novels." Tucker laughed. "Not enough desperados and shootouts for you." "Not nearly," she agreed with a smile. "Though I confess I prefer this reality, building something lasting seems far more heroic than gunfights at high noon." They reached the line cabin by midday, delivered supplies to the grateful hands, and shared a simple meal before starting the return journey. Tucker deliberately took a different route back, wanting to show Tessa a particular view that had always moved him deeply. As they crested a rise, the entire valley spread before them, the ranch house tiny in the distance, the land stretching away in all directions, pristine under its covering of snow. The late afternoon sun cast long blue shadows across the white expanse, and the sky arched above in a dome of perfect azure. Tucker drew the sleigh to a halt, allowing the horses to rest while he and Tessa absorbed the panorama. "This is where my father brought me when I was 8 years old," he said quietly. "Just after my mother left, he lifted me up onto his saddle and rode to this exact spot, then told me to look as far as I could see in every direction." Tessa listened, understanding the significance of the memory. "He said, 'This land is my legacy, son. Everything I've worked for, everything I believe in is right here before you. Someday it will be yours to tend, to protect, to pass on." Tucker's voice grew soft with remembrance. I didn't fully understand then what he meant. I thought he was talking about the acres, the cattle, the buildings. But standing here with you now, I see he meant something far greater. "What did he mean?" Tessa asked gently. Tucker turned to face her directly, taking her gloved hands in his. "He meant the future, Tessa. The possibility of building something that outlasts us, that carries forward not just our name but our values, our vision of what life can be at its best." Her amber eyes were luminous in the winter light, fixed on his face with perfect attention. "When my father died, I thought my duty was to preserve exactly what he had built, to keep it unchanged as some sort of monument to his work. But that was never what he intended." Tucker's voice grew stronger, more certain. "He meant for me to build upon his foundation, to adapt when necessary, to create something living rather than guard something static." Tucker released one of Tessa's hands to reach into his coat pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. "You helped me understand that, Tessa. You showed me that true legacy isn't what we cling to, but what we create together." He opened the box to reveal a ring, his grandmother's, a simple gold band set with a small but perfect diamond that caught the winter sunlight and fractured it into tiny rainbows. "This land is my legacy," Tucker said, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "And you're the missing piece that makes it complete. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, Tessa? Of building this future alongside me?" Tessa's eyes filled with tears that did not fall, her joy too complete for weeping. "Yes," she said simply, "with all my heart, yes." Tucker slipped the ring onto her gloved finger, knowing it wouldn't be properly fitted until they returned to the warmth of the ranch house. But the symbolic act felt right in this place, with the land spread before them and the future opening like a book waiting to be written. Their kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with the promise of all that lay ahead, a shared life, a shared purpose, a shared legacy that would extend far beyond either of them alone. When they finally drew apart, both were breathing quickly, their faces flushed with more than the winter chill. "I love you, Tucker Sloane," Tessa said, the words emerging with the clarity of absolute certainty. "Not despite your connection to this demanding land, but because of it, because of the man it has shaped you to be." "And I love you, Tessa Callahan," he replied, "for showing me that even the harshest frontier has room for tenderness, for growth, for hope." They drove back toward the ranch house as twilight gathered, the horses seeming to sense their rider's joy and stepping with extra vigor despite the long day's journey. Stars began appearing in the darkening sky, the same stars that had witnessed generations of humans striving on this land, that would witness generations more to come. Inside the ranch house, warmed by the blazing fire Jeb had thoughtfully maintained in their absence, Tucker properly placed the ring on Tessa's finger, both of them admiring how perfectly it suited her hand. Neither too elaborate for a schoolteacher nor too plain for the woman who would help shape the ranch's future. "When shall we marry?" Tucker asked as they sat before the fire, sharing the simple contentment of being together in what would soon be their home. "June would be traditional," Tessa mused, "after the school term ends." Tucker nodded, thinking, "The railroad construction will be well underway by then, and the spring calving should be complete." "Practical considerations for a practical couple," Tessa said with a smile. "But I find I rather like that about us, that we build our dreams on solid ground." "Speaking of building," Tucker said, suddenly remembering something, "I've been meaning to show you these." He crossed to his desk and returned with several sheets of paper covered with drawings. "What are these?" Tessa asked, examining them curiously. "Plans for expanding the ranch house," Tucker explained. "I've been working on them with a carpenter from Denver. The east wing would become a proper library, large enough for your books and mine combined. And this section here would be ideal for a nursery when the time comes." Tessa's eyes widened as she realized he had been planning for their future together even before formally proposing. "You were confident of my answer," she observed with a touch of amusement. Tucker shook his head. "Hopeful, not confident, but I wanted to be prepared to show you that I was thinking beyond just the two of us to the family we might build together." His thoughtfulness touched her deeply. "It's perfect," she said, studying the plans more closely. "Though perhaps the library might be a bit larger. I have quite a few books still in storage in Boston." Tucker laughed, delighted by her practical response. "As large as you like," he promised. "This house should reflect both of us, both our pasts and the future we'll create together." They spent the evening discussing those plans for the house, for the ranch, for how Tessa might continue teaching at least until they started a family. Neither felt the need to rush decisions or press for immediate changes. Their courtship had taught them the value of deliberate progress, of building something enduring rather than grasping at momentary passion. When it grew late and Tucker needed to take Tessa back to town, propriety still governed their behavior, despite their engagement. They lingered on the porch for a final moment together beneath the vast starry sky. "In June you won't have to leave," Tucker said softly. "This will be your home too." Tessa looked out over the snow-covered yard, toward the distant outbuildings and the land beyond. "It already feels like home," she said. "Because you're here." Their kiss goodnight held the sweet anticipation of all that awaited them. A lifetime of evenings together, of shared work and purpose, of building upon the legacy they had each inherited and transforming it into something uniquely their own. The wedding of Tucker Sloane and Tessa Callahan took place on a perfect June day, with wildflowers blooming across the high meadows and the snow-capped peaks standing sentinel in the distance. They chose to hold the ceremony at the ranch rather than in town, with chairs arranged on the broad lawn before the newly expanded ranch house, which now featured the library Tessa had requested and rooms prepared for the family they hoped to create. Guests arrived throughout the morning, townsfolk from Clearwater, neighboring ranchers, Tessa's students and their families, even a few distant relatives who had traveled from the east for the occasion. The ranch hands had spent weeks preparing the property, mending fences, painting buildings, creating a setting worthy of the day's significance. Tucker stood nervously beneath an arch of aspen boughs, dressed in a new suit ordered from Denver. Jeb, serving as his best man, offered quiet reassurance as they waited for the ceremony to begin. "Never seen the place looking so fine," the foreman commented, surveying the transformed ranch. "Your father would be proud, son. Not just of the land, but of the man you've become." Tucker nodded, too emotional to speak. From where he stood, he could see the railroad construction in the distance, the crews laying track across the southern section of his property. Rather than detracting from the day, the sight reassured him, evidence of his choice to embrace adaptation, to build on his father's foundation rather than merely preserve it unchanged. The small orchestra from Clearwater began playing, and the assembled guests rose as Tessa appeared on the arm of Mr. Wilson, the general store owner who had become a father figure to her in the absence of her own. She wore a gown of ivory silk, simple yet elegant, with wildflowers woven into her chestnut hair instead of a formal veil. Her amber eyes found Tucker's immediately, and the love shining in them steadied his racing heart. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, with Pastor Jenkins speaking eloquently about building foundations that could weather frontier storms, about the sacred work of creating a home not just of wood and stone, but of shared purpose and abiding love. When it came time for the vows, Tucker had feared he might forget the words he had carefully prepared. But looking into Tessa's radiant face, they flowed naturally, as if they had always been within him waiting for this moment. Tessa, when we met, I believed the frontier left no room for tenderness, that survival here required isolation rather than connection. You showed me a different truth, that even in the harshest places, perhaps especially there, the human heart needs bonds of love and trust to truly flourish. Tucker took her hands in his voice growing stronger. I promise to build with you a home where legacy means not just what we preserve but what we create together. I promise to stand beside you through drought and plenty, through winter's cold and summer's heat, through all the seasons of the life we will share. This land is my legacy, and you are the missing piece that makes it complete. I offer you my name, my heart, my future, freely and without reservation. Tears shone in Tessa's eyes as she responded with her own vows. Tucker, when I came west, I was seeking not just a new beginning but a place where I could contribute something lasting to the world. I found that purpose in the classroom, but I found my heart's home with you. You've shown me that true strength lies not in rigidity, but in the courage to grow, to adapt, to build something living rather than guard something static. Her voice was clear and unwavering. I promise to stand beside you in all endeavors, to create with you a legacy of love that will outlast both of us. I promise to face whatever challenges come with the same steadfastness you bring to this land, patient in hardship, joyful in abundance, faithful through all seasons. I offer you my name, my heart, my future, freely and without reservation. The exchange of rings, the pronouncement of their union, the first kiss as husband and wife, all passed in a blur of joy and solemnity, witnessed by the community that had come to mean so much to both of them and by the land that had brought them together. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night, with tables set up on the lawn, lanterns hanging from trees, music and dancing under the stars. Tucker and Tessa moved among their guests, accepting congratulations, sharing their happiness, binding themselves ever more deeply to the community that would support their marriage in the years ahead. As twilight deepened into night, Tucker drew Tessa away from the celebration for a private moment. He led her to the rise where he had proposed, where now they could see their wedding guests in the distance, small figures moving in the glow of lanterns around the ranch house. "Happy Mrs. Sloane?" he asked, his arm around her waist. Tessa leaned into his embrace, her head resting against his shoulder. "Perfectly," she assured him. "And you, husband?" "More than I knew was possible," Tucker admitted. "When my father said this land was his legacy, I never imagined it could include such joy." Tessa was quiet for a moment, contemplating the ranch spread below them and the future stretching before them. "What shall we build here, Tucker? Beyond the house and the herds and the daily work, what legacy shall we create together?" Tucker considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. A place where work has meaning and beauty is valued. Where education matters and innovation doesn't erase tradition but builds upon it. He turned to face her directly. "A home where love is the foundation of everything else we attempt." "That seems a worthy legacy," Tessa agreed. "One that might endure long after the borders of the ranch have changed, after the buildings have been rebuilt, after even our names have faded from memory." Tucker nodded, understanding her meaning. Legacy wasn't about perpetuating one's own name, but about contributing to a future that would unfold in ways they couldn't imagine from where they stood. "We should get back to our guests," Tessa said after a while, though she made no move to leave the shelter of Tucker's arms. "In a moment," he replied, reluctant to end this quiet interlude. "I want to remember this, you and me, at the beginning, with everything still ahead of us." Tessa tilted her face up to his. "Not everything still ahead," she corrected gently. "Some precious things already found." Their kiss beneath the rising moon sealed a covenant deeper than the words they had spoken before witnesses. A private promise between two souls who had discovered in each other not just love but purpose, not just companionship but completion. When they finally returned to the celebration, it was as partners in the truest sense, united not just by ceremony and law, but by a shared vision of what they would build together on this land that had drawn them both westward. This frontier that had challenged their separate strengths and would now witness their combined determination to create something lasting from its demanding soil. Epilogue. 5 years later. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows of the ranch house library, illuminating dust motes that danced in the golden light. Tessa sat at the large oak desk, her journal open before her, recording the day's events as had become her custom. Outside, the sounds of ranch life continued, the distant lowing of cattle, the rhythmic pounding of a hammer as one of the hands repaired the corral fence, the cheerful barking of the collie that had become Tucker's constant companion on his daily rides. "Mama, Mama, look," the excited voice preceded its owner, as 3-year-old James Sloane burst into the library, his dark hair tousled, his amber eyes so like his mother's, alight with discovery. In his small hands, he clutched a perfect blue robin's egg, holding it with surprising gentleness for one so young. "Inside voice, Jamie," Tessa reminded him with a smile, "your sister is napping." "Sorry," he whispered dramatically, then continued in a stage whisper that was hardly quieter than his previous exclamation. "Look what Papa and I found. It fell from the nest, but Papa says the mama robin won't want it back now that we touched it, so we can keep it." Tessa examined the treasure gravely. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. Where shall we put it so it stays safe?" Jamie considered the question with the seriousness only a child can bring to such matters. "In my collection," he decided. "With the special rocks and the feather from the eagle." "An excellent choice," Tessa agreed. "Let's find a small box for it so it doesn't roll away." As she helped her son secure his new treasure, Tessa glanced out the window to see Tucker approaching the house, his tall figure easily recognizable even at a distance. He moved with the same purposeful stride that had first caught her attention years ago, though now there was an ease to his bearing that spoke of a man comfortable in his skin, secure in his place in the world. "There's Papa now," Jamie observed, following her gaze. "Can I go show him where we put my egg?" "Of course," Tessa said, "but remember." "Inside voice because Ellie's sleeping," Jamie finished for her, already heading for the door. "I remember, Mama." Tessa watched him go with a mother's mixture of pride and amusement, then returned to her journal, adding a note about the robin's egg to her record of the day. The pages were filled with such observations, the children's milestones, the progress of the ranch, the changes in the community as Clearwater grew from frontier town to established settlement. Together, the journals created a living history of the life she and Tucker had built, a legacy in written form to complement the more tangible one they created daily in their work and family. The ranch had prospered in the 5 years since their marriage. The railroad spur had indeed brought increased access to markets, allowing Tucker to expand his operation to include breeding stock that commanded premium prices. The Peterson property, purchased that first year, had added crucial water rights that helped them weather subsequent dry spells without the devastating losses that had threatened before. Tessa had continued teaching for the first 2 years of their marriage, until Jamie's imminent arrival made the daily trip to town impractical. But her involvement with education hadn't ended with her formal teaching career. The ranch now hosted regular visits from Clearwater's students, who came to learn about cattle raising, agriculture, and the natural history of the region. The library where Tessa now sat had become a resource not just for the Sloane family, but for the entire community, with books carefully selected to promote understanding of the land and its sustainable management. The sound of Tucker's boots in the hallway preceded his appearance at the library door. He stood for a moment watching her, love evident in his expression. At 30, he had matured into his responsibilities without being burdened by them, his face lined by weather and laughter rather than worry. "Jamie showed me his latest treasure," he said, crossing to kiss her. "He's categorizing his collection by color now, apparently." Tessa smiled, leaning into his embrace. "Your influence. You and your careful breeding records and grazing rotation charts." Tucker chuckled. Could be worse influences for a boy to have. He glanced at her open journal, recording today's great events. "Indeed. The robin's egg will now be immortalized alongside Ellie's new tooth and the successful branding of the spring calves." Their easy banter was interrupted by a soft cry from upstairs, indicating that 15-month-old Eleanor Sloane was awake from her nap. "I'll get her," Tucker offered. "Jamie set up his museum on the porch and wants you to come see the grand opening." Tessa nodded, closing her journal and rising to follow him. As they separated at the staircase, Tucker heading up to retrieve their daughter, Tessa continuing toward the front of the house, she was struck by a moment of pure contentment, a crystalline appreciation of the life they had created together. The ranch house had expanded again the previous year, with a new wing added to accommodate their growing family and Tucker's expanding business operations. Yet despite its increased size, it remained a home rather than a monument, lived in, welcoming, the center of a working ranch rather than a showpiece. Outside, Jamie had arranged his collection of natural treasures on the porch railing: rocks, feathers, pine cones, and now the robin's egg, each carefully placed and labeled in his childish hand with help from Jeb, who had become a doting honorary grandfather to the Sloane children. "Welcome to the museum," Jamie announced importantly as Tessa appeared. "You're just in time for the tour." Tessa listened with appropriate attention as her son explained each exhibit, asking questions that elicited detailed stories of where and how each item had been discovered. Tucker joined them shortly, carrying Ellie, whose dark curls and blue eyes, her father's eyes, gave her a strikingly different appearance from her brother despite their obvious sibling resemblance. As the tour concluded, Jeb approached from the direction of the bunkhouse. "Mail came while you were out checking the north pasture," he told Tucker, handing over several envelopes, "including something official-looking from Denver." Tucker handed Ellie to Tessa while he examined the correspondence. His expression grew serious as he read the letter from the Territorial Land Office. "What is it?" Tessa asked, recognizing the familiar concentration in his features. "The petition was approved," he said, looking up with a mixture of satisfaction and solemnity. 5,000 acres of the high country west of here will be preserved as public land, protected from development. The news represented the culmination of nearly 2 years of effort by Tucker and a coalition of neighboring ranchers. An initiative to ensure that some portion of the wilderness they had all come to cherish would remain undeveloped for future generations, a legacy broader than any single family's holdings. "That's wonderful," Tessa said, understanding the significance of the achievement. "Your father would be proud." Tucker nodded, his gaze moving from the letter to his children, to the ranch spread around them, to the distant mountains now guaranteed to remain as they were, wild, challenging, beautiful. "I think he would," he agreed, though he might have been puzzled by the concept at first. "As you were," Tessa reminded him gently, "when Harrison Green first suggested setting aside land that could have been used for grazing or timber." Tucker smiled, acknowledging the truth of her observation. "I've learned a thing or two since then about different kinds of value, different forms of legacy." Jeb cleared his throat. "Speaking of legacy, those new Hereford bulls you ordered should arrive on next week's train. Crawford over at the bar is mighty jealous you got first pick from that Denver breeder." Tucker handed the letter to Tessa and turned his attention to ranch business, discussing with Jeb the preparations for integrating the new breeding stock with their existing herd. Jamie, bored with adult conversation, had moved on to showing Ellie his collection, carefully helping his sister touch the softer items while keeping the fragile egg out of her reaching hands. Tessa watched them all, husband, children, the old foreman who had become family, with a heart full of gratitude for the life they had built together. When she had boarded that westbound train in Boston 5 years earlier, fleeing an unwanted betrothal and seeking purpose, she could never have imagined the fullness of what awaited her on the Colorado frontier. Later that evening, after the children were asleep and the ranch had settled into the quiet rhythms of night, Tessa and Tucker sat together on the porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The day's heat had given way to the cool mountain air that made summer evenings on the high plains so pleasant. "I've been thinking," Tucker said, his arm around Tessa's shoulders, "about adding on to the schoolhouse in town." Tessa turned to look at him, surprised. "Adding on, it's barely 6 years old." "And already too small," Tucker pointed out. "Clearwater's growing faster than anyone expected. There are 38 children enrolled for fall, with more coming when those new families from Pennsylvania arrive." "True," Tessa acknowledged. "Miss Baker mentioned they might need to split the classes, have the younger children attend mornings and the older ones afternoons." "Which isn't ideal for families with children of different ages," Tucker said. I thought perhaps we might donate the funds for an addition, another classroom at least, maybe more. Tessa studied his face in the fading light. This isn't just about practical considerations, is it? Tucker smiled, never surprised anymore by her perception. No, he admitted, it's about legacy too. Education was your first love here, your first contribution to this community. I'd like to honor that, to build something that carries that forward. Tessa leaned into his embrace, touched by his understanding of what would matter most to her. I think that's a wonderful idea, she said softly. Though we should involve the town council, make it a community effort rather than just our contribution. Of course, Tucker agreed. And perhaps we could incorporate some of your ideas about practical education, expanded gardens, maybe workshops for teaching trades alongside academic subjects. They discussed the possibilities as night deepened around them, their conversation ranging from immediate plans to longer-term visions, from practical logistics to philosophical aspirations for their children's future. This had become their pattern over the years, sharing not just the day's events but their evolving dreams, adjusting and expanding their understanding of what they were building together. It's remarkable, isn't it, Tessa said during a lull in their planning, how far we've come from that first meeting in the general store. Tucker nodded, remembering the reserved, wary man he had been, the barriers he had constructed against connection. I was so certain the frontier left no room for anything beyond survival, he said. That attachment was a liability rather than a strength. And I was so determined to prove I could make my own way, establish my own purpose apart from what Boston society had planned for me. Tessa smiled at the memory of her younger self. We were both right in a way, just incomplete in our understanding. How so? Tucker asked, genuinely interested in her perspective. Tessa considered her answer carefully. The frontier does demand strength, self-reliance, the ability to endure hardship. But those qualities don't preclude connection. They actually make meaningful bonds possible between people who have proven themselves capable of standing alone if necessary. Tucker nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Their love had never been based on desperate need or weakness, but on the recognition of each other's strength, the choice to build something together that neither could create alone. When I told you this land was my legacy, he said softly, I thought I was explaining why I couldn't risk attachment, why preservation of what my father built had to come before personal happiness. And now, Tessa prompted when he paused. Tucker gazed out at the ranch, at the land that had shaped him, challenged him, sustained him through loss and renewal. In the moonlight, he could make out the shapes of the barn, the corrals, the bunkhouse, the new stables built last year, tangible evidence of growth and adaptation rather than mere preservation. Now I understand that legacy isn't what we inherit but what we pass on, he said finally. Not what we receive but what we create. My father gave me the foundation, land, skills, values, but the structure built on that foundation is ours, shaped by our choices, our vision. Tessa nodded, satisfied with his answer. And a structure that will continue to evolve long after us, through our children and their children, through the community we help strengthen, through the land we help protect. A living legacy, Tucker agreed. They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the distant nickering of horses in the pasture, the soft hooting of an owl, the rustle of wind through cottonwood leaves. Sounds that had once seemed lonely to Tucker now spoke of home, of continuity, of life's persistent rhythms. We should go in, Tessa said eventually. Morning comes early on a ranch. Tucker stood and offered his hand, helping her up with the same courteous gesture he had used since their courtship days. One of these days we should sleep late, he suggested with a smile. Let Jeb handle the morning chores just once. Perhaps on our anniversary, Tessa proposed, knowing even as she said it that neither of them would likely take such an indulgence. Their shared work ethic was too ingrained, their sense of responsibility to the ranch too strong. As they moved toward the door, Tucker paused for one last look at the night sky, at the land spread beneath it, at the home they had created at the nexus of past and future. Thank you, he said simply. Tessa didn't need to ask for what. She understood that his gratitude encompassed everything, her presence in his life, their children, the expanded vision of legacy they had crafted together, the balance they had found between honoring the past and building the future. And thank you, she replied, her voice warm with all that remained unspoken between them. The daily gratitudes too numerous to enumerate, the deep currents of love that sustained their partnership through all seasons. Inside the house that had grown from bachelor ranchers dwelling to family home, they moved through familiar routines, checking on sleeping children, securing doors, banking the fire against the mountain night's chill. Simple actions repeated countless times, yet never reduced to mere habit because of the intention behind them, the conscious choice to create and maintain a place of safety and belonging amidst the beautiful harshness of the frontier. In their bedroom, as moonlight streamed through curtains Tessa had sewn during her first year as Tucker's wife, they prepared for sleep with the comfortable intimacy of a couple whose love had matured through daily sharing of joys and burdens. Their conversation turned to practical matters: Jamie's upcoming birthday celebration, the next day's work schedule, plans for preserving the garden's summer abundance. Yet beneath these mundane exchanges flowed the deeper current of their connection, the understanding that had grown between them since that day when a solitary rancher and an Eastern schoolteacher had first crossed paths in a frontier general store. An understanding that legacy was not a burden to be shouldered alone but a gift to be shared, that the most enduring inheritances were not land or possessions, but values, vision, and the courage to build something lasting in partnership with those we love. As they drifted toward sleep in each other's arms, Tucker's last waking thought was how thoroughly Tessa had transformed his understanding of his father's words. "This land is my legacy," James Sloane had told his son on that distant day. And now, with Tessa beside him and their children sleeping down the hall, Tucker finally grasped the full meaning of that inheritance. Not just acres to be defended, but possibilities to be realized. Not just a past to be preserved, but a future to be created. This land, this love, this life together, this was the true legacy, and it was richer, fuller, more enduring than anything he could have imagined on his own.